Hey everybody. Well, wow. That Anet blog post by John Peters is a game changer. We are getting what amounts to an extra 4 trait points. This is going to make a ton of new, incredibly powerful builds possible. While certainly traits are going to change and be moved around, we can speculate how this will impact the professions in PvE. So I'm going to go through each profession and briefly touch on what the builds could look like with the changes that Anet discussed today. We'll start with Guardian. Guardian seems like it's going to get a huge boost out of this. Right now the meta build is 45005 and actually doesn't contain any Grandmaster traits. After these changes, it will essentially be 66006. This means the meta Guardian will get out all of its current DPS and utilities plus 3 additional traits. In Zeal, there isn't really a big compelling trait to take, but you can always take Scepter Power, which could make Scepter the default Guardian swap weapon. In Radiance, right-handed strength is obviously really, really good, especially with Scepter Power being taken in Zeal. And in Virtues, you will now always have the ability to have Unscathed Contender on your bar without sacrificing any of the utility that a Guardian normally brings. So overall, a Guardian might see a shift from Sword to Scepter as the preferred weapon swap, and will be able to bring a ton more utility and will have better DPS. The only downside to this for the Guardian is that most of the Guardian GM traits are pretty weak for PvE overall. But generally speaking, Guardian is a big winner in this new change and is going to benefit quite a bit. So next up we have the Engineer. The Engineer is going to gain a lot. Right now the current meta build is 66002. With a specialization in the last line as well, we're looking at basically what amounts to a 66006 Engineer, which means that the Engineer is going to get an additional 10% damage modifier from enduring damage, and will get the Grandmaster trait A General Implant, which means 50% faster endurance regeneration. And you even get Kit Refinement or Speedy Kits or Power Wrench thrown in there as a freebie, whichever one seems to make the most sense. It's pretty simple, but a 10% DPS boost and much improved endurance regen capabilities are hardly anything to scoff at, and it's going to push Engineer, whose DPS is already near the top, to be even higher. So Engineer is a big winner from this. Next up, Ranger. Ranger doesn't gain a ton from this, unfortunately. The Ranger in PvE is still going to need Marksmanship, Skirmishing, and Nature Magic to perform its role. In Skirmishing, the Ranger's not really going to benefit from any of the GM traits, but I guess the Ranger will be able to take Quick Draw without losing any of its other traits, which is pretty noteworthy, but not really going to be a DPS increase. In Nature Magic, Rangers will have the benefit of 2 additional traits beyond Vigorous Spirit. Strength of Spirit, pretty obvious, but that's only 90 more power. That's not really a game changer. There's no real other traits in the Nature Magic line that are quite compelling. So unfortunately, the Ranger won't be gaining any percent DPS trait boosts, and no real huge stat increase, and the utility boosts are going to be pretty minimal. So overall, the Ranger is looking sort of like a loser in this change relative to the other professions. So what do we think about Thief? Thief is going to be loving this. A 66006 Thief. Let's think about what that is. That's going to be really, really powerful. Getting lead attacks is going to be a massive DPS boost. I would not be surprised if lead attacks gets moved to a Grandmaster trait. So at least you have to spend one of your major trait choices on it. But yeah, lead attacks, that's going to be anywhere from a 5 to a 15% DPS boost. Thief already has insane DPS, so getting lead attacks too, oh my gosh, that's just going to be huge. So a Thief is going to have flanking strikes, lead attacks, and throw of the crime, or initial strikes, or bountiful theft. This is really everything a Thief could want. Even more DPS and awesome utility. Bountiful theft, giving all of your teammates vigor, is amazing. If you don't have enough fury, throw of the crime is amazing. it'll basically let you look at your group, see what your group needs the most, and trait for it. Thief, and at the same time, the Thief is going to be gaining massive DPS % boosts from this. So all in all, it's just going to be really great for Thief, and Thief's a big winner. So the next profession is Mesmer. Mesmer, on one hand, it's a nice boost for the Mesmer. Mesmer can run all the mantra boosting traits without really compromising their reflect traits. However, the Mesmer is kind of in the unenviable position of having their best traits scattered in 4 lines, which has been the problem already. Unfortunately, with this system, it seems like we're only going to ever get to have 3 trait lines at a time. So if you have good traits in 4 different lines, you are going to have something left out. This means that Mesmer still has to sacrifice a lot of its personal DPS capabilities to get the utility it needs. Mesmer won't be gaining anything significant utility-wise from the Grandmaster traits in Dueling or Inspiration, and doesn't really gain any new DPS boosts from those lines either that it didn't already have access to. If the Reflect traits don't matter, Mesmer could run 66006 with Compounding Power and Phantasmal Haste, but there's nothing really else compelling in Illusions, especially at the Grandmaster level for PvE. Overall, this is really not too exciting for Mesmer. I have to say that Mesmer is going to be one of the losers, relatively speaking, in this change. So next up, Necromancer. This is a pretty exciting change for Necromancer, but it's not really a game changer. Previously, a Necro had to run 66002 or 62006. The former with Dagger build that basically auto-attacked in Dagger, and the latter a more interesting to play but slightly less DPS Death Shroud build. Well, with this change, you don't need to compromise. You get to run both builds. The Necro will get to run the Death Shroud build without the drawback of being terrible when your life force is empty. From the perspective of the Death Shroud build, you're going to gain a lot more precision when outside of Death Shroud, and you're going to get shorter cooldown and longer duration Warhorn skills, and you're going to get a 2% per condition DPS modifier, which is a pretty welcome boost to Necro damage. If you're looking at it from the perspective of what does the Dagger build gain, you gain Vuln stacking and Death Shroud capabilities and an additional 5% damage modifier from Strength of Undeath. All these changes are definitely a positive for the Necro, but none of them jump out as really great. Compared to what the Thief is gaining, for example, these gains don't really compare. So on one side, the Thief is gaining a ton, and the Mesmer is gaining very little, with the Necro falling somewhere in the middle of the two. Unfortunately, the Necro needed a little bit more than this to become more important in the PvE spectrum. So I'm going to say that this is like a push for the Necro. It's good, but it's not as great as could be. Next up, we have Warrior. For Warrior, this is pretty much the best thing that could have possibly happened. Currently, the Warrior has to make huge sacrifice of its personal DPS to gain access to the awesome traits like Empowered Allies and Phalanx Strength. Well, those days are over. A pure Greatsword warrior specializing in Strength, Arms, and Tactics is going to get Slashing Power, Berserker's Power, Deep Strikes, Rending Strikes, Forceful Greatsword, Empowered Allies, and Phalanx Strength. So that is insanely good. The pure Greatsword Warrior is going to provide an insane amount of personal damage and maximum team buffing capabilities. If you had asked me to come up with a wish list for what I would want the Warrior buff to be, I wouldn't have had the nerve to ask for something this good. So this is better than my wildest dreams for Warrior buffs. Another thing you could think of is from a solo Warrior perspective, you're going to have the ability to go into Strength, Arms, and Discipline for fast hands. And when you're solo, you're going to gain the following benefits. You'll be able to have Deep Strikes and Rending Strikes, and you'll be able to take them without losing fast hands. And you get the additional Discipline traits. Versatile Power is going to give you a bunch of extra might. Heightened Focus is going to give you 15% more crit chance. What that means is that you'll be able to bring Heightened Focus, which means you no longer need Signet of Fury, meaning you can take Signet of Might. So a warrior in a solo situation with Banner of Discipline down still going to have 95% chance to crit, and is going to get an extra 180 power from Signet of Might tacked on. For a profession that has been continually nerfed in PvE for over a year, this is really going to be a return to form for Warrior, and Warrior is going to be in a really good place with these changes. Now, I fully expect some of the tactics traits to move around. I would probably guess that Empowered is going to move to the Grandmaster level and be buffed 2% per boon. So you might have to pick between Empowered or Phalanx Strength. But either way, even if that's the case, it's still a great change, and I'm pretty happy about it. So lastly, Elementalist. This is really interesting for Elementalist. It's a huge boost for the Dagger Focus and Scepter Hammer builds, but it's not really a huge gain for Staff. This is great for fans of non-staff PvE builds. So the Dagger Focus is likely to specialize in Fire, Air, and Earth. Fire and Air will be the same, but going into Earth Magic will give Serrated Stones for 5% more damage and Enduring Damage for 10% more damage. That plus a free additional Grandmaster trait is just going to be a huge boost. Dagger Focus is usually referred to by veteran LE players as the most fun build to play. So getting 15.5% more DPS on top of it is going to make it very competitive with Staff in terms of DPS. And this is pretty much exactly what veteran Dagger Focus players would have wanted. Scepter Focus is going to gain a lot from the new Water Magic line. 6606 is going to be great for them. Fire and Air will remain unchanged, of course, and the traits there will be the same. But being able to take Vital Striking, Piercing Shards, and Bountiful Power are going to be huge DPS gains for the Lightning Hammer. You're going to lose a 10% boost from losing Earth Magic, but the gain of 20% from Piercing Shards should hopefully lessen that blow quite a bit. This isn't as big a gain as Dagger Focus is getting, but it's pretty exciting nonetheless for fans of Scepter Hammer. On the flip side of the coin, though, Staff is going to suffer a little bit. Taking Blasting Staff is now a huge liability to your DPS. Assuming Fire and Air as a given choice, and Earth for... Your choice is Earth for a pure DPS boost, but no Blasting Staff, or Arcana for Blasting Staff and not much else. I don't see any game-changing Arcana traits that are going to make up from losing Stone Splinters. Sure, you get Blasting Staff and Renewing Stamina, but Evasive Arcana in a PvE Staff build isn't exciting, nor is Elemental Surge. For Staff, you can no longer have the great DPS modifiers and Blasting Staff at the same time, so this is a pretty big nerf. Combined with the buffs to Dagger and Scepter builds, it might be enough to push Staff at least to have to share the meta with the Dagger and Scepter builds. For an Elementalist, if you're a fan of Daggers or Scepter builds, these changes are big winners. If you're a fan of Staff, you have to consider it kind of a loss. Time's going to tell. Traits are going to move and change, but for now, that's the initial impression I have. So that's my basic overview, everybody, of what this blog post is shown. Remember, it's all speculative. As we saw, some traits will move and change a bit when HoT comes out, and so some of what I said is almost certainly going to be wrong or changed or different by the time we get more information. But hopefully it gets people pretty excited about thinking about the new possibilities, because I know I am, and I really can't wait to see what they do with it. If you have any questions or any ideas or any thoughts, please hit it up in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them and definitely read whatever comments you have.